Social surveys. Social surveys are one of the commonest methods of sociological research. They can be used to discover facts about a population, to uncover differences in beliefs and values, or to test a specific hypothesis. Surveys involve asking questions to a large number of people, usually from a wide area of the country. It is a method particularly favoured by positivists who seek to measure society. This podcast will consider social surveys in general, then go through each stage explaining what is involved in doing a social survey. Most surveys take place within a relatively short space of time and give a snapshot of some aspect of social life at a particular time. However, a few surveys are longitudinal, that is, they take place over many years. This is a very expensive process and is generally only done by governments. The National Child Development Survey started in 1958 and is one example of this, as is the much more recent Millennium Cohort Study. This is collecting information about the lives of children born in the year 2000. The children have been surveyed in the first year of life, at 3, at 5 and at 7 years of age, and the next survey is due when they're 10. Surveys of a sample at 13 and 17 are under discussion. This type of work gives detail on the long-term impact of factors on children's lives, but in an era of rapid social change, the information may be out of date by the time it is collected. The first stage of a social survey is to identify the hypothesis to be tested. The hypothesis may emerge from previous research, or may reflect interest in social change or government concerns with social problems. It takes the form of a statement which can be proved or disproved by collection of the relevant data. Early decisions will be taken about how the survey is to be done, and funding will need to be sought. Research may be funded by the government, by university research departments, and by organisations such as the Joseph Rowntree Foundation. Researchers must avoid any situation where the funding body is interested in finding a certain result and will pressurise the researcher or restrict publication of the work. The next stage is to work out how the concepts involved may be operationalised, literally, how they can be measured. Social class is a major determinant of success in education, but researchers have used a number of different ways of measuring it. Parental occupation is often used, but the constantly changing nature of the labour market can make this problematic. For instance, many of the routine office jobs, which might once have been considered middle class, share most of the characteristics of working class jobs. This operationalising stage is most important, since the measures chosen will determine the outcome of the research. Once the concepts have been operationalised, the researchers need to decide whether to ask the questions in person or to use a questionnaire, which can even be sent by post. Then the questionnaire or interview schedule can be designed. It may contain open or closed questions, or more commonly, a mixture of both. There then follows a pilot survey. This is a small-scale survey to see if the information required can be gathered by the chosen method, and to identify any problems of interpreting questions. Once the pilot survey has been completed, the researcher can move to the main survey. The population to be surveyed must be identified, and, because the time and money needed to contact the whole population would be great, sociologists study a small group or sample. In normal circumstances, sociologists will seek a representative sample, one which is an accurate cross-section of the population being studied. This is important because otherwise the results will not give a true picture, and the sociologists will not be able to make generalizations from their work. Sampling is based on the laws of statistics, and these laws require that samples should be random. That is, each member of the population should have an equal chance of being included in the sample at the outset. Researchers may use a systematic sample, for example taking every 10th name from a list. So long as the first number is selected at random, the systematic sample is sufficiently random for research purposes. Obviously, this is only possible if the researcher knows who is in the population, and in some cases a sampling frame or list may be available. Schools keep registers, voters are listed on the electoral register, and hospitals keep records of patients, although the sociologist may not be able to access them. Even if a sampling frame exists, it may be incomplete or out of date. The telephone directory lists people resident in a particular area, but only if they have a home and a telephone, whilst the electoral register is based on information collected in October and lasts for nearly 18 months, during which time people may move house or die, and those under 17 will not be listed. Wilmot and Young used the electoral register in the classic family studies. Even with a complete sampling frame, it's possible that small groups of the population may be missed, so sociologists may stratify the sample, that is, divide it into groups at the start of the process and take a separate sample from each group. In order to minimise costs, researchers may wish to concentrate their study in certain areas of the UK using cluster or multi-phase sampling. Here specific areas are selected and respondents are selected at random within each area. Townsend used this method in his famous study of poverty. Where there is no sampling frame and the characteristics of the population to be studied is known, then the researcher may consider using a quota sample, that is, studying a specific number of people with certain characteristics determined at the start. So if the population is 50% male, then half of those interviewed will be male. This type of sampling is often used in opinion polls and market research. There can be both theoretical and practical reasons for using non-representative samples. For example, interpretive sociologists are much more interested in validity than generalizations. Glaser argues that researchers may gain useful knowledge by studying non-typical people, a technique often used by feminists. At a practical level, how could a sociologist find a sampling frame for criminals who have never been caught, or illegal immigrants, or homeless people? Laurie Taylor used a snowball sample, getting each respondent to introduce him to another, in his study of the London underworld. More recently, the same method was used by McNamara in his study of male prostitutes in New York. One researcher solved this problem by advertising for respondents and obtaining a volunteer sample. In both these cases, it is difficult to know if the sample is representative, but if this is the only way of conducting the research, then some data may be preferable to none at all. Once the sample has been finalised, the process of asking questions can begin. This may involve interviewers or sending out questionnaires. It is desirable that everyone selected actually agrees to take part, as they did in Anne Oakley's housewife survey, whilst the 2000 British crime survey achieved an 80% response rate. Non-response can be a major problem because if the response rate is low, the answers received will not be typical and no generalizations can be made. Postal questionnaires have particularly low response rates, so may be unsuitable for many forms of research. Efforts may be made to contact respondents on more than one occasion to get the highest response rate possible, and interviewers will be trained to avoid interviewer bias. Once the data has been collected, it can be analysed. This can be a long process, but computers have made increased speed possible. The results can then be compared to the hypothesis and a conclusion reached. It is possible that the hypothesis is proven, and the researcher may regard this as a very satisfactory outcome. However, even if the hypothesis is disproved, knowledge has still been gained from the research. Often finding out that something is not true can be as important as proving that it is. However, if this is the case, the researcher will need to study the results carefully, formulate a new hypothesis, and start again. Overall, then, social surveys are a very important method of sociological research. They involve collecting standardized data in statistical form. The success of a social survey depends ultimately on the quality of the data that is produced.